Hello, everybody. Welcome. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world today. And thank you for joining us to celebrate the completion of our study together of Tractate Sotah. It is lovely to see familiar faces and new faces on this call. And we are excited to celebrate this tractate with you. My name is Rachel Scheinerman. I'm the editor of My Jewish Learning and the Daily Dose of Talmud. And as we usually do, we are going to be joined by a panel of wonderful experts to steer us around some highlights of this tractate. I will introduce them in just a minute, but I first want to just take a really quick look back at the tractate together. You might recall that 50 days ago, we were here in this space celebrating the completion of Tractate Nazir. And one of the things we mentioned at the time is that Nazir, the practice of Nazirut, of becoming a Nazirite, and committing oneself to God for a certain period of time and not cutting one's hair and not drinking alcohol and avoiding corpse impurity was a practice that most of us don't have a lot of experience of. And that made it really interesting. And what I thought as we were reading this tractate is Sotah, which is the trial of the woman who has been suspected but not proven of committing adultery, is something that absolutely none of us have any experience of at all. Nazir might be rare, but Sotah is no longer existent. And it's not because their adultery doesn't happen from time to time that people don't become suspicious of adultery from time to time. It's actually because the rabbis tell us quite explicitly that it was nullified. And not only was it nullified in ancient times, it was nullified before the temple was destroyed. So even when there was still the possibility to perform this ritual, it had been nullified. So we have just been through an entire tractate, which is devoted to understanding a ritual that most of the people talking about never saw performed, and which they had no expectation that it would ever be performed again, which is just sort of an interesting perspective on a Talmudic tractate. When we read something like, say, Pesachim, which you might recall from a few years back, we get a really detailed discussion of Passover in the temple. And that might seem a little bit strange because we don't do Passover that way, but we can read it through the lens of understanding the rabbis expected the temple to be rebuilt. But in this case, they don't seem to have any expectation of bringing the Sotah ritual back, but nonetheless saw a lot of value in studying the topic. And as hopefully do we. So we saw a lot of rules that they developed around this and lots of other things that they today with our panel of experts. So before I introduce them, I just want to say once more, I see some of you are already on the train, but please in the chat, tell us where you're from. And you're also invited to comment on your experience of this tractate. What are you taking away from Sotah as we turn the page to Gittin? What did you appreciate? What did you struggle with? What questions do you have for our panelists? You can have questions that are on your mind now or questions that are inspired by the things they have brought to teach us today. So let me now introduce them. We have with us today Rabbi Elliot Goldberg. Can you give a wave there, Rabbi Goldberg?
Hi there.
Rabbi Goldberg is an executive coach and consultant with more than 2 decades of experience in Jewish day schools and a lifetime of summers in Ramah camps. And he has not yet annoyed at me for continually mentioning his podcast, Tov, which he co-hosts. It's a podcast about Jewish philosophy and the good place. And it is about to wrap up. So if you want to binge it, now is a good time to start checking it out. We are also joined by Dr. Sarah Ronis.
Hi everyone, Mazel Tov.
Dr. Ronis is an associate professor of theology at St. Mary's University in San Antonio, Texas, where she teaches courses on the Hebrew Bible and its interpretation. She's also an expert on Talmud, of course, and you can check out her most recent book, Demons in the Details, which is available on Amazon and is about, well, as you might expect, demons in the Talmud. All right, and lastly, we are joined today by Rabbanit Dasi Fruchter, who has struggled valiantly through traffic to get here today. It has been a little, but we're so glad that she made it. She's the spiritual leader of the South Philadelphia Shtibel, and she teaches also a very popular Daf Yomi class every day, which we also can recommend. So we're so glad to have all of them here. Each of them have brought something in the tractate that they found meaningful and exciting to study. So we will turn to what they have prepared, but of course, please keep the comments coming. We'll have a chance in between their presentations to respond a little bit to some of your comments, to answer some questions, and hear from you. Okay, so Rabbi Goldberg, let's start with you because you're actually going to talk about today's page.
Yes, okay. One of the things I loved about the study of Masechet Sotah is it's a rich Masechet with many topics from a wide variety of topics. It feels to me like we've had a series of Masechtot that are far more focused, and sometimes, I don't know if it happened to you, got a little monotonous. And what I loved is the diversity of sugiyot here in Masechet Sotah. And I found I was really drawn to the last chapter, and want to share a little bit from the end. So it says in the Mishnah, Bapumos shel Titus gazru atarat kalot v'shelo yomad adam et beno Yivanit. During the war of Titus, that's the war between the Romans and the Jews that led to the destruction of the temple. They decreed about the crown of brides, a crown that brides would wear the wedding ceremony. That's not what I'm going to talk about today, but you can read about that yourself. And they decreed that a person should not teach their children Greek. And that's going to be the topic that I want to focus on today. And the Gemara picks up on this, and it brings a brighter that says, Tana Rabbanan, the sages taught, when the kings of the Hasmonean monarchy besieged each other, Hyrcanus was outside Jerusalem and Aristobulus was inside Jerusalem. Each and every day they would lower dinars in a box from inside the city, and they would send up daily offerings back into the city. So there's a civil war between competing factions of the Hasmonean family that ruled. This is a post-Hanukkah story. And one faction was inside the city and one faction was outside the city. And because of the war, they had to figure out how are we going to get what we need to the temple to do, to keep the sacrifices going. And if you know, right, Jerusalem has walls around the city. They lowered from the walls a box with money in it, and then they would raise the box back up with the sacrificial animals in it. What does this have to do with Greek? You'll find out in a second. A certain elder, says the Braita, who is familiar with Greek wisdom, communicated through this Greek wisdom, and he said to the people, as long as they are engaged in the temple service, they will not be delivered into your hands. So what is he? Somehow he got a message out of the city saying, as long as they're able to do the sacrifices, the faction that's outside the city has no hopes of winning the war, because somehow by keeping the practices in the temple going, the folks inside would be able to maintain control. So what happened on the following day? They lowered the dinarim, the money in the box, and they sent up a pig to them. And once the pig reached halfway up the wall, it inserted its hooves into the wall, and Eretz Yisrael shuddered 400 parsecs. So the fact that they were sneaking a pig into Jerusalem for the temple, of course, where it wasn't used, caused there to be an earthquake of sorts, I guess. So we felt the shudder 400 parsecs. That's a big distance. And when the sages saw this, they said, cursed is the person who raises pigs, and cursed is the person who teaches his child Greek wisdom. And so what happened, right? Because the message was sent out using Greek wisdom, and that led to this happening. The rabbis say, curse to you for teaching your children Greek wisdom. So now we see both a Mishnah and a Braita saying you can't teach your kids Greek. But the Gemara has a question about that. Is that so? But didn't Rabbi Yehuda Nasi say in Eretz Yisrael, why should people speak the tongue of Syriac, which is a version of Aramaic? Rather, they should speak either Hebrew or Greek. And Rabbi Yosef said in Babylonia, why should they speak the vernacular tongue of Aramaic? They should either speak the sacred tongue Hebrew or the tongue of the Persians, which was used in public worship in Babylonia. So here we have another source that says it's okay to use local languages, other languages, in contrast to both our Mishnah and this Braita, the story about the Hasmonean civil war. And this raises this conversation about what language should Jews speak? Should we speak Hebrew right, our language, holy language, the sacred language, or should we speak local languages, right, Syriac, Aramaic, and even ones like Greek that represent other traditions of wisdom that are different from ours. And then the story about the Hasmoneans, right, the knowledge of this foreign language and different speaking, right, led to some complications. So the Gemara resolves the tension between the two and says the Greek tongue is discrete from Greek, and Greek wisdom is discrete, meaning Greek knowledge and Greek languages are two different things. And it could be okay to speak language, but not okay maybe to study the Greek wisdom that got the message out. And that's how they resolved this dispute. It struck me as I read this that this in some ways is a relevant conversation for us, although we're not involved in internal civil war, we're not sneaking pigs into the temple to shift the tides of the war, but we're living in an age where Jews live around the world, speak lots of different languages, and Jewish sources are available in lots of languages. And it made me think at this moment, on this day when we're marking the end of a Masechet, how different the whole study of Daf Yomi would be if we didn't have access to translation. I know, given the pace, while I love studying Talmud in the original, given the pace of Daf Yomi, while I refer to the original language of study, my prominent language of reading the Daf Yomi to keep pace is through the English translation. And I know so many people are able to do Daf Yomi because of the plethora of widely available translations that are good ones with great commentary that make it accessible. Right? When I was first studying Talmud, the English translation that was available was the Sonsino, which is an awesome translation because it's good and academic and can really help unlock the original text. But sometimes the Sonsino English needs as much commentary as the original text. And the translations like the Koran that I use are so user-friendly and so available. And it leads me to think that our practice today weighs in differently on this debate, meaning you could say we should study Talmud just in its original language. That is what it's meant to be. We should study the Hebrew and the Aramaic. That's the original text. But if we did, fewer of us would be on this call. Fewer of us would be studying Daf Yomi. And I think regardless of how the sugya lays out the difference between the traditions and the different value statements about how we should access our text, I think what has won out over time is we should study our texts in the languages that we understand them. And that allows us to access this whole endeavor of Daf Yomi, which so many of us are benefiting from in this 7-year cycle. And we wouldn't be able to do it without our access to the text in our own language. So I'm thankful for that. And I thought as we're marking the end of a Masechet, it was interesting to note that this debate shows up on the last page as well. And kudos to all of you who are breaking your teeth over the Aramaic and the Hebrew on a daily basis. And kudos to all of you who are breaking your teeth on the English and all the commentary, because it's quite a feat and endeavor that you're all engaged in. And blessings to the people who helped make this so accessible to us so that we could broaden the study of Talmud, which I think is a good thing for the Jewish world. And back to you, Rachel.
Thank you so much. I feel like this issue of multiple languages has come up a number of times now in Daf Yomi for us. And it's an interesting reminder that the rabbis really lived in a multilingual world. And you know, we think of ourselves as being separated from these sacred texts by language, most of us, but many, they've sometimes felt that way too. Okay, I have a few comments here that I wanted to share. Let's see. Let's start with a quick question from Charlie Hall, who said, are there any translations of the Babylonian Talmud into Spanish? Speaking of translation, I don't know that off the top of my head. I am not a Spanish speaker. Do any of our panelists know?
I do. I am not a Spanish speaker, so it wouldn't help me, but there
are a large number of Spanish speaking Jews there, especially in like Argentina and stuff. So I wouldn't be surprised. Maybe somebody on this call can chime in if you know.
I think
I'm
there's
sorry
a
we don't.
German version of the Yerushalmi on Sefaria. That doesn't help me either, but that doesn't answer the question, but there are other languages out there.
Yeah. All right. Michael ST writes, I was fascinated by the tension that he saw in many of these discussions between a certain level of misogyny, which is not absent from rabbinic texts, as we know, and compassion for the suspected adulteress in the Sotah. The rabbis, in his view, had some understanding of human failings and wanted to save savable marriages. But I agree that the non-Sotah digressions were fascinating. And it was almost as if the rabbis themselves wanted to get off the topic of the actual drinking ordeal without thoroughly exploring the consequences. I suspect they knew it never worked. I thought that last point was interesting. Could it ever have worked? Was it always a bad idea? Did it work well? This leads right into a question from Lori Stark, who says, my understanding is that Sotah never happened, right? I said that the rabbi said it was nullified, but her question is, did it ever happen at all? Was it theoretical? Please clarify. So I thought I would send this over to Dr. Sarah Ronas next, because my understanding is you're going to address some of these questions in what you have to say for us.
Yes.
So let's go there.
Thank you. And I just want to also call attention in the chat, Abby Seitz linked to the Tashma translation of the Talmud into Spanish, which is apparently an ongoing project. So for those looking for a Spanish language Talmud, follow that link. So mazel tov, everyone, on completing Sotah. And what I want to talk about in my brief time today is, what does it mean to spend this much time on a part of the Torah that, as we've already said, isn't operative for the rabbis, and which, as many of you have already noted in the chat, you had, let's say, ambivalent or complicated feelings about? What does it mean to inherit a tradition which includes parts that you're just not sure about? And what I loved about Masachet Sotah, this tractate, is that I think it models at least four approaches to that question. How do we deal with complicated parts of our tradition that we have ambivalent feelings about? And in sort of looking through this, I identified four approaches. The first, and this is the one that I think probably resonated the least with many of us, was to lean into it, to spend some time with explicit and at times violent depictions of women's sexuality. And we certainly see some of that in this tractate. The second is, I think, exactly what Micheline or Michaeline, I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name, what you sort of noted, which is to look away, to talk about maybe the cosmic timescale, the coming of Mashiach, or just some like really fun Agadah that doesn't seem to have anything to do with Sotah. You know, okay, we have to talk about this, but like there's this other cool stuff I'd really like to spend my energy on. The third is to engage with it, to ritualize it, to delve into it really profoundly, but also to build in a real expectation that the ritual might not actually work. And here I want to name, I saw somebody in the chat note Yishai Rosenzweig's, Rachel Edelman, noted Yishai Rosenzweig's book, The Ritual That Never Was. So, you know, about sort of Sotah as this ritual imagination. But even within that, sort of building in this expectation that it doesn't actually or always works. And I want to just remind us of this Mishnah in Sotah. I believe this was 20A or B, and apologies that I did not write down which of those I found it on. But if she has merit, it delays punishment for her. There's merit that delays for a year, for 2 years, for 3 years, right? So even there, the rabbis are saying, we know that sometimes it doesn't actually work. And what's particularly remarkable is, as Rachel pointed out earlier, none of the rabbis had seen this. And so they could have sort of imagined a world where it worked perfectly. But that's not, they said, no, it doesn't always work. And we have to reckon with that there might be reasons built in that it doesn't always work. Which is sort of, extra fascinating. Now, doesn't always work doesn't mean never worked. So I saw, Lori, your question in the chat as well about, I heard this never happened. It seems pretty clear that the rabbis think it did happen. Now, you're absolutely right. In a much later period in Jewish tradition, like the early modern period, we get people saying, "Oh, it never happened." But the rabbis seem to really think it did happen, and that gets us to the fourth approach that I think our tractate models for us, which is to historicize it. It did happen. It happened in a particular moment, but also to actively reject it in the present moment. To say, yes, this is a part of our tradition, but it is not a thing that we do anymore for good reasons. And I wanted to just in a minute sort of look at that piece with you. Right, so the Mishnah on 47a states, Mishe rabua min ha'afim paskua mayim hamarim. So from the time when male adulterers proliferated, the bitter waters were nullified. And why were they nullified? Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is the one who nullified it because he quotes from Hosea, the book of Hosea, which is fascinating because Hosea has a very distinctive approach towards women and sexuality. But Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai quotes from Hosea, "I will not punish your daughters when they commit harlotry, nor your daughters-in-law when they commit adultery, for they consort with lewd women," right? Because the men are also consorting with lewd women, there is no punishment for the women in those relationships. And then the Gemara continues and says, Rabbi Elazar says, the prophet said to the Jewish people, "If you are particular about yourself, the water evaluates your wives, but if not, the water does not evaluate your wives." By Jewish people here, Rabbi Elazar means men. But I think there's something really powerful about this. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, as the one who says, you don't get to hold your wives to this incredibly high standard, or maybe it's not such a high, you don't get to hold your wives to a standard if you are not holding yourselves to that standard as well. And I think it's not an accident that it's Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. And here I'm going to do just a quick preview of the very next tractate. In Gittin, we are going to read a story about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai at the moment that the Second Temple is destroyed. And we're going to see how he has a very profound understanding of the needs of the particular moment and the needs of the future in the face of crisis. And so I want to sort of end just by saying, I think this tractate really then offers us these four different approaches to lean into it, to look away, to engage and ritualize, or to historicize. And what I particularly appreciate is that it models this variety of ways that even the rabbis related to our complex Jewish tradition. And one of these ways, or a combination of these ways, might resonate with you on a particular topic. But I love that this tractate really reminds us that the rabbis developed a choice of strategies about how to deal with our sacred texts. They had a choice of strategies, and so do we. So Mazel Tov on completing.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. And thank you for that reminder that, we've talked sometimes especially in certain tractates like Yevamot, where we find things difficult for us. It's a good reminder that the rabbis sometimes faced the same dilemma, that it's not just us living 2,000 years later or 1,500, however many years later. Lots of good comments in the chat about how this ritual might have actually felt and functioned and how it might have actually fallen out and been effective. There's a little too much for me to read out, but I encourage you all to check them out and peruse the chat in between listening, if that's something you're comfortable doing. I wanted to actually now invite two people who put in comments to come talk about them for a minute and say a little more. So first is Daniel Rosenbaum that said, he said this was a strange tractate. And I feel like we've had so many tractates that are candidates for strange tractates. So Daniel, if you wouldn't mind elaborating on that comment, what made this one especially strange for you?
First of all, the fact that there was so many other topics that were presented that were completely unrelated to Sotah. I kept on thinking, all right, well, they had this topic, so where do they jam it? Well, we'll just jam it into Sotah. And the whole idea of forcing a woman to drink this horrendous liquid, I found that kind of bizarre even for Jews. And that they would use the dust from the floor of the temple and the ink. I mean, it's, even if you were not guilty, it was so disgusting. I can only imagine how terrible it would be for any woman. And the fact that there is nothing like that for a man, if a woman's committing adultery, I guess there's a man involved with that. So I just found it seemed like so different from the other tractates that we've been reading that's had at least some internal consistency. This was all over the place. So that's why I thought it was strange.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it definitely is not parallel, of course, because her committing adultery is a whole nother thing from him doing it, right? If he sleeps with somebody else, that's not the same level of offense. But yes, thank you for illuminating the ways in which this was strange for you. I'd like to also invite, I don't know if it's Jerry Berg or Vicky Bravo or both of you on this Zoom account, but you mentioned that the last pages of this tractate are a reminder of the new Judaism to be created for the Golah, aimed at replacing the temple. So I'm wondering what you saw there and what you're referring to, what you're thinking about.
It's Jerry here. My wife Vicky is not present at the moment, but it was interesting to me that it follows on this point that you made, that the rabbis themselves historicize Sotah as a kind of, it seemed to me by the time I got to the last chapter, it was sort of a preparation for all the other things that the rabbis had doubts about. For example, we learned that the Urim and Turim no longer function. We learn that the Shekhinah can no longer be present. We hear of God through the Bat Kol instead. And to me, that last chapter was a sort of premonition or preview of what Judaism was to become after the destruction of the temple and the creation of a diaspora where new kinds of rituals and memories of the past have to be created. And I got the feeling that the rabbis doing this tractate had the same feeling about Sotah that many of us do. And they were trying to hint at a different kind of future.
Thank you. Thank you. Though they were a bit down on it, weren't they?
Can I just say, thank you for that comment, but I loved that. I don't think it's an accident that the next tractate is Gittin, divorce, right? Like there are other options.
All right. In the interest of time, we are going to turn to Rabbanit Dasi Fruchter, who is going to delve into a central emotion in this tractate that has really come to the fore. A lot of these tractates have been very emotional, but jealousy is really a hallmark the motivation of the behavior of the husband in this tractate. And so I know you wanted to talk about that with us today.
Amazing. Thank you, everyone. I love being on this Siyyum. Everyone is so engaged and wise. It's so wonderful to learn with all of you. And I do want to dive into, actually, so Rabbi Goldberg went for the last daf. I'm thinking about daf 2, because the whole thing about mitzvos, which is really interesting, commandments in the Torah, is that sometimes they take into account our needs and desires, but they're not meant to be done. They're not like the thing you're supposed to do. And what I mean by that is there was an early discussion in this Gemara that says, Hamekane, one warns their wife, diavad in, lechatchila lo. That's an after the fact thing. Lechatchila, as an ideal position, don't do it. Just don't do it. Right. And the way that they got there is because they looked at the words in the Torah, and it actually leaves out, the general term that indicates that it should be for all time. It just says, actually, hamekane, one who has to, one who does issue a warning. And throughout Daf Yomi, each and every day, in and out in our class, someone might raise their hand and say, well, but seems like they got themselves into a really sticky situation there. And I would say, don't do it. It just says at the very beginning, diavad, after the fact, you should do it. And I've just been like stewing on this idea about the word used in the Torah for warning one's wife in this context. The word is mikane, which is related to the word jealousy or zealotry. This is the same word quoted in Pirkei Avot in the Ethics of the Fathers, as it says, tina, jealousy is one of the things that takes a person out of this world. Not like in a good way, not like out of this world. No, it like writes someone out of the world. And yet you see this entire tractate, which is founded on jealousy, right? And so ultimately I saw in the chat, someone suggested, wouldn't it be great if there was a different way to resolve this? And I think, yes, I think that is true. There should be a different way to resolve it. This is like where the humanness of each other, like it starts to get a little bit uncomfortable. We remember what jealousy can do to us. We remember what infidelity can do to us, desire, all of these different things. It's not a pretty look for a tractate. A couple other things I just want to say. I was thinking about other examples in the Torah that had to do with jealousy. Can anyone put in the chat moments in the Torah, stories in the Torah or Tanakh that has to do with jealousy, or the word kin'ah, zealotry? Joseph's brothers, excellent, Martin. That was one of the ones I was hoping. Cain and Hevel, another one I was hoping. Thank you so much. Good. Oh, interesting. Lynn says God is a jealous God, Pinchas. Okay, we got them all right now. So I'm just going to go with these for now. First of all, Cain and Hevel, Cain and Abel. The word Cain might be linguistically related to the word for jealousy, right? It's like ultimately the first thing that, led to murder was this idea of like, I can't focus on anything bigger than this thing. It is boiling my blood. That's one example. Another example, and this is the part that's been haunting me in a good way, and I want to bring forward to the room. The case of Yosef and his brothers. It says that Yosef's brothers were not able to speak to him in peace or peaceably. It says, Vayisnu oto, they hated him, v'lo yachlu dabro l'shalom, and they couldn't speak to him in peace. That's number one. Their jealousy led to a lack of peace. Then, of course, you have Pinchas, the zealot for the nation, who goes ahead and does some gruesome things in order to stop a plague, licentiousness in the community. And then God says, because you were jealous or zealous for me, you know what I think you need? A brit shalom, a covenant of peace, right? And that's what you need. And in our situation, in the Sotah ritual, you have, this instance where there's jealousy. It's happening. The heat is hot. The temperature is turned up. And what do we say throughout the tractate? That we erase God's name for the purpose of shalom. shalom bayit, right? So what is the antidote, or what is the preventative measure for this kind of lack of peace that leads to jealousy or vice versa? I think about the word shalom. I think about the word shalom, which is connected to wholeness, understanding what you're a part of, understanding that you're humble and we are humble and in God's world, wondering what happens to us when we truly feel at peace, right? Does the jealousy come in the same way or not? So I'm thinking of Sotah as an example of kina, right? As an example of jealousy gone a little, perhaps too far, but also an acknowledgement that we have it. Cain has it, Yosef has it, Pinchas has it, maybe even for good, but with it all the time. Here's my action step for us. Whenever you think jealousy, take shalom with you, take peace with you. So even if we are experiencing jealousy, try to hold shalom on the opposite hand. Like, what does that actually look like and mean? Shkoyach, everybody.
Thank you, Rami, for sure. I have the privilege of teaching Hebrew school to a bunch of 2nd and 3rd graders at a local synagogue this year. And as you were speaking, was reminding me, we did a curriculum with the stories of Genesis and Exodus. And what I noticed about when I went through it with them and talked about it with them is how much jealousy factors into almost every story, right? It's all over the place. And your examples are great. And while you were speaking, the chat filled up with even more examples from all over Tanakh, and how much these young children that I've been working with can relate to it. It is such a universal experience and emotion. And it was very easy for them, even at that young age, to talk about just how destructive it can be, just how powerful, almost involuntary, and how destructive it is. And it was really interesting to discuss it with them. They could recognize that in themselves. And I'm not sure that, 3 decades past all of them, I've evolved so much past it. Like I've experienced, we've all experienced it. It's so universal. We have so many good comments coming in. I'm so sorry. There's no way I'm going to be able to treat all of them, but I wanted to bring forward an interesting point from Diana Bremens here. She says that the Torah comes down really hard on witchcraft and witches, which she's quick to point out are generally women. And yet it promotes this really sort of, the Sotah ritual feels kind of like magic to sort of control women. So I thought maybe we could just as a group for a few minutes respond to that comment, because I think that is so much in the background, and it is a hard thing to figure out how to talk about magic in the Torah and the Talmud. What is magic? What's not magic? Is it associated with women? When is it authorized? When is it not authorized? I know Dr. Ronas is going to have some thoughts on this, and I'm sure Elliot and Dasi, you will as well. Anyone want to take this one on?
I defer to my colleague from Texas.
That was very senatorial. So I'm going to find and put in the chat a link to an article I wrote about women and magic in rabbinic texts as they relate to the Torah. But I think Emily's point in the chat is a really powerful one, that the rabbis absolutely believe that there are lots of things that happen in the world that look magical, that are totally acceptable. And when we get to Tractate Sanhedrin, we're going to have a lot of discussions about really cool, magical things that the rabbis themselves are doing. But I think what Emily is pointing out is that it has a lot to do with who's doing it. So there's a really famous saying attributed to a professor named John Gager, which is, magic is what they do and religion is what we do. Thinking about how the claim that something is magic is a way of dismissing it. And so, Moses and the bronze serpent, not magic, but miracle. And women being shady, magic. So sort of thinking about, so what I always tell my students is, when we see claims about magic, we want to be asking, well, who's making the claim and what's really at stake for them? And I think that's an invitation for us to think more about some of those social dynamics.
I would piggyback on that. I saw 2 comments in the text about the short passage about Jesus in Masechet Sotah, which takes me back to like high school and studying Eliyahu Navi and Elisha the prophet, where I remember saying, wait, these guys in our books do the same things that Jesus do. Why do we believe that our prophets could do certain miracles and Jesus couldn't? Similar to what you said, Dr. Onis, but it made me think. The comments in the chat said, someone called out that said, hey, there was this passage about, a rabbi shooing Jesus away that might have led to the start of Christianity. And the response comment that said, well, the rabbi in this story lived 2 centuries after Jesus, so it couldn't have been Jesus. And what that makes me think, going back to Sarah, your frame about how we look at the history, different frames to read the Talmud. I don't think these are historical stories about Jesus, that we can learn about Jesus' life in the Talmud, but it does give us an insight about how the rabbis told the story of the founding of Christianity by looking at their stories in the Talmud in that frame. And similar to, right, this piece about magic, like what we do is legitimate and what they do is not. The stories about Jesus in the Talmud are sometimes that too, to say, what we do is legitimate and somehow this person went off the path and took people with him. But it's not about the historical frame. It's maybe about the historicity, right? How are we telling that story? And if you're interested in that, I guess I should put it in the chat too, but on my nightstand right now is Jesus and the Talmud by Peter Schaefer, which it's dense and academic. But if you're interested in that topic about how to read about what the rabbis thought about Jesus through the stories in the Talmud, that's a place to go.
Thank you. Maybe we should do a round of what's on everybody's nightstand.
My laundry that I need to put away. That's
I don't have anything Jewish on my nightstand. Erica Goldman Brody comments on this. Similarly, in her family, whoops, it just flew away from me. Anything that her mother did, her father called superstition, but in his family, if it was done, it was a minhag, it was a custom. So and other points about some of the magic practitioners in the Bible are certainly men, though my mind always goes first to the witch of Endor, who is certainly a woman. All right. I think in the interest of time, we should probably come to the end of the tractate now. So I'm going to turn us back to Rabbi Goldberg to steer us through the last few lines of the tractate, and then we can make a bracha celebrating the completion of this course of study.
Okay. Masechet Sotah ends by saying, Mishemet Rebbe, when Rabbi Yehuda Nasi died, Batla Anava Beyirat Chetz, humility and the fear of sin ceased. This comes in a long series of statements about the passing of great rabbis and what left the world, right? What attribute that they had left the world, that no one reached the heights that they did. Rav Yosef, Amarle Rav Yosef Latana, Lo tichne anava deika ana. Rav Yosef says, don't teach that humility ceased. There's still humility in the world, and I'm an example of that. Amarle Rav Nachman Latana, lo titne yirat chet deika ana. Rav Nachman says the same thing. Don't teach the fear of sin ceased, because there is still an example of someone who has that me. You could read that as haughty statements by these rabbis, but I think people saying, I live in the tradition of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi and keep these values alive, and these things that we aspire to in our great teachers and leaders who pass, we can keep those traditions alive in our own selves and the way we carry on their traditions moving forward. And with that, Masechet Sotah ends.
Thank you so much. So now my colleague Ben Harris, who makes all the magic happen in the background, is going to put up the Hadran and Kaddish so we can formally celebrate completing, but not leaving. We will one day return to Masechet Sotah. I see it says Masechet Megillah. That we must have filled in the blank back in Megillah, but that's okay. We can redo that in our minds. Rabbanit Fruchter, would you take us through the Hadran, please?
It would be an honor. So exciting. Hadran Alaf Egla Rufa. We conclude the 9th chapter of Masechet Sotah, Uslika la Masechet Sotah, and all of Masechet Sotah as well. Let's do it, everybody. Hadran alach Masechet Sotah, Bahadrach alan, Datan alach Masechet Sotah, B'datach alan, Lo nitnishe minach Masechet Sotah, Below titnishi minan, Lo ba'alma hadain, Below ba'alma hada'ate. Yehi ratzon l'fanecha, Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu, Shetehei Toratcha u'manutenu ba'olam hazeh, U'tehei imanu le'olam haba. May Torah be with us forever. Chanina bar Papa, Rami bar Papa, Nachman bar Papa, Achai bar Papa, Abba Mari bar Papa, Rafram bar Papa, Rachish bar Papa, Sorchav bar Papa, Ada bar Papa, Daru bar Papa. Ha'arevna Adonai Eloheinu et divrei Toratcha befinu ubefifios amcha beis Yisrael. May you sweeten the words of Torah in our mouths. V'nihia kulanu anachnu v'setzeinu v'setzei amcha beis Yisrael. Kulani yodei shemecha v'lomdei Toratecha. May oivai techakmeni mitzvotecha ki liolam hili. Yehi libi tamim b'chukecha. Lama'an lo evosh. La'olam lo ashkach pikudecha ki bam chiyitani. Baruch atah Adonai. Lamdeni chukecha. Amen, amen, amen. Salah ba'ed. Modim anachnu lefanecha Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu. Shesamta chalkenu miyoshvei beit hamedrash. V'lo samta chalkenu miyoshvei kranot. She'anu mashkimim v'heim mashkimim. Anu mashkimim l'divrei Torah v'heim mashkimim l'dvarim b'telim. Anu amelim v'heim amelim. Anu amelim makablim schar. V'heim amelim v'einam makablim schar. Anu ratzim v'heim ratzim. Anu ratzim l'chaya olam haba. V'heim ratzim l'v'er shachat shene'amar. V'ata Elohim toridem l'v'er shachat. Anshe damim u'mirma. Lo yechatzu yamehem. V'ani avtach bach. Last paragraph, everybody. I think you need to scroll to another part or page. If you want to go to the next part. Yes, amazing. Yehi ratzon lefanecha Adonai Elohai. May it be your will, Hashem, my God. Kishem she'azartani l'sayim masechet Sotah. Just as you helped me, you assisted me in completing Masechet Sotah. Kein ta'azreini la'atchil masechto d'sfarim acherim l'sayma. So too, please help me finish other Sfarim. Start other Sfarim and finish them. Lilmod l'lamed, to learn and to teach. Lishmor v'lasos l'kayim, to guard and to do and to fulfill. It's kol divrei Talmud Toratecha b'ahava, with all of the words of your Torah in love. Uschus kol hatanaim v'amoraim v'talmidei chachamim yamod li u'lezari shelo tamush haTorah mipi u'mipi zari v'zera zari ad olam. V'titkayim be b'hitalechacha talcha otach v'shachvacha tishbor alecha v'hakitzota hi tizkichacha hivi yerbu yamecha v'yosifu l'cha shnos chayim orach yamim b'mina v'smola osher v'chavod Adonai oz la'amo yitain Adonai yivarech et amo b'shalom.
Amen.
Rabbi Goldberg.
Thank you. All right, and Ben will take the Kaddish now.
Join me if you wish. Yikadal v'yikadash shemen rabbah v'almadahu atid l'chadata l'achaya matya l'asakna yaton l'chaya alma u'mivnei karta Yerushalayim u'shachlala echala. Wait, I need my reading glasses. Sorry, begava ma'aker palcha nichadar be'ara lata pulchana dishmaya la'atre v'imloch kedusha brichlu. V'malchutei v'arei b'chayachon v'mechon chayil chobei Yisrael b'agav b'zman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbam borach l'olam omei omaya v'barach v'shabach v'bar v'torma v'nasei v'tadar v'taleh v'talal shmei l'kudsha v'richlu le'ela mikol b'chata b'shirata shush b'chata b'nechemata damran b'ama v'imru amen. Yisrael v'al tamidei hon v'al kol tamidei hon v'al kol mad oskim b'araita Diva Torah Dain, but Diva Chol Atar V'Atar Yehi Lachon Lahon Lachon Shlam Rabba Achina V'Chista V'Rachamei V'Chayei Arichei Mezona V'Vichei V'Furkan Amikadam V'Von V'Yishmaya V'Imru Amen Yehi Shlam Rabba Min Shemaya V'Chaim Aleinu V'Akol Yisrael V'Imru Amen Oseh Shalom B'Romav Hu Yaseh Shalom Aleinu V'Akol Yisrael V'Imru Amen.
Amen. Mazel tov, everyone. Mazel tov. Tomorrow we will turn to tractate Gitin, which is the penultimate tractate in Seder Nashim, the third order of the Talmud, which deals with women. And as we move toward the end of that Seder, we also move toward the midpoint of our journey in Daf Yomi together. There are about 6 orders in the Talmud, and we're approaching the midway point at the end of the summer. Rob Plass, I'm sure, knows the date, and we'll put it in the chat in 1 minute. And in that tractate, we will move on, as Dr. Rona said, to the procedures surrounding divorce. How do you end a marriage legally and properly? The consequences of that will be explained, and the myriad of complications that can arise will also be explained. We'll have a lot of interesting detours, of course, including one of the most famous stories in the Talmud, which comes, I think, about page 55. The rabbis spend several pages really talking about the destruction of Jerusalem, how it happened, and their thinking about it, which is a rare window into their thinking about that tragedy that really shaped everything about their world. So lots to learn, lots to look forward to. Thank you, as always, to all of you for your erudite, thoughtful, and interesting comments. I think we might make what's on my nightstand a regular feature in these Siyyumim now, because I love to hear what you're thinking about and learning. Thank you to our really wonderful and thoughtful panelists, all, for bringing us such rich teachings from the tractate and leaving us with just more to think about and ponder. Much appreciated. It's a delight to be here with all of you today. And we will be in your inbox tomorrow morning to study Tractate Gittin. And if you would like, if you're not already participating, we have a Thursday morning Daf Yomi week in review class. It's fast. It's half an hour, highlights from the past week in Daf Yomi. Dr. Ronas will join us again tomorrow morning, and we're going to focus tomorrow morning on an introduction to that tractate. So if you want to get a good start on Tractate Gittin, please go ahead and join us. The information about how to register for that class is at the bottom of every single Daf Yomi email. So scroll to that stuff at the bottom that you don't always read and look for it there. Really great to see you, and we will see you in your
Wait, can I just add
Yeah.
that it will be posted on YouTube afterwards? I'm seeing some folks in the chat say, oh, they can't come because they have work at that time. You can always find these recordings posted on the My Jewish Learning YouTube channel.
True. They're usually up a few hours after the class. The class is Thursdays, 9:30 a.m. Eastern. They're usually up by about midday. On YouTube, the My Jewish Learning YouTube channel is cleverly named My Jewish Learning Com. You can look for it there. All right. We'll see you in your inbox tomorrow morning. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. Lovely to see you.
Bye, everyone.